Thank you, Minion. Wouldn't it be cool if airships were still a major form of transportation today and we all had our own personal jetpacks? What if punch card computing had been invented in the 1850s? What if we lived in the world as imagined by writers like H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, and we had mechanical men and grand adventures on submarines and time machines, so there's always time to stop for tea? In 1900, a series of postcards was published depicting life as artists imagined it would be in the year 2000. And they pictured personal flying devices and life in grand underwater cities and wacky labor-saving mechanical devices. This version of the future didn't quite work out, but sometimes they got it right on the nose. This illustration from a 1906 issue of Punch magazine shows that people in the park with their newfangled wireless technology devices, sitting there paying attention to their devices and not talking to each other. Yeah, that looks pretty familiar. The only thing we're missing today is having the antennas coming out of our hats. There's a concept called Retro-Futurism, which concerns itself with what people in the past thought their future was going to look like. I've just shown you several examples from the turn of the century. In the 1950s, they thought we'd all be wearing silver jumpsuits and bubble helmets. Today, our future is either going to be all virtual reality or Mad Max, depending on who you ask. Steampunk is a retro-futuristic style inspired by the Victorian and turn of the century visions of the future. What if all of that had really come true and we lived in that world? Now, you may never have heard of steampunk, or you may not really know how to define it, but it's inspired art and music and fashion and performance and live-action festivals like the Watch City Steampunk Festival held here in Waltham. In steampunk, we are playing with that Victorian-era retro-futuristic version of the world. What if we had all of our modern technology, but it was also handcrafted of brass and leather, both functional and artistic? In steampunk, we are mixing real Victorian and turn-of-the-century history with science fiction, modern technology, current-day cultural values, and a huge dose of whimsy. We're making that future that didn't happen, happen. I mean, these two look like they'd be right at home in that undersea city that the authors in 1900 thought would happen. So we're exploring the past, and we're exploring the future, but the angle that we take to get there is kind of sideways. Yeah, that's us, the folks with the gears and goggles on our hats. And what is it about goggles and steampunk anyway? My answer to that is you're living a life where adventure could break out at any moment. Or science. Science could also break out at any moment. Either way, you're going to want your goggles handy. The term steampunk came in the 1980s to name a genre of science fiction literature that was incorporating Victorian-era elements to it. But that's certainly not the first time this style had been seen. After all, back in the 1960s, you had that TV show, The Wild Wild West, which mixed an American Western setting with James Bond-type spy gadgets. And in 1954, Disney released 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which gave us that iconic vision of the great submarine, the Nautilus, and its battle with the Kraken. There's all of these influences that go into what we call steampunk today. So really, it's a name that was made up to kind of talk about things that we were doing anyway. Steampunk is definitely not historical recreation. After all, it's not really historical when we're adding ray guns and airship pirates. So let's call it a retro-futuristic reenactment, reenacting that history that never happened. Last year's Watch City Steampunk Festival had a theme of airships, and I asked people, what is it about airships that steampunks like so much? And the answer was, or one of them, was that airships are the perfect example of that future that never happened, a technology whose future might have been different if things had just gone a little bit differently. And steampunk is all about playing with those what-ifs. Steampunks really enjoy mixing up the old and the new. We like to take broken bits of old technology and create something new out of them. We all have our smartphones. They're wonderful devices. We all use them, but they're kind of cold. And you can't crack them open and see how they work, at least not without voiding your warranty. But for steampunks, show us something made with brass and leather and where you can see the gears turning. Then you've really got our attention. By the way, do you remember that illustration from 1906 of everybody sitting in the park with their wireless devices? So this is Bill. That's a working ham radio on his back. And as you can see, he has, in fact, got the antenna sticking up out of his hat. And believe me, Bill does not have any problem talking to anybody. It's technology with a sense of history, technology with a sense of humanity, and technology with a sense of humor. So steampunk has become popular at the same time as some other trends that I've observed. One is the rise of the maker movement, which is an effort to try to teach people to use tools again, like using soldering irons to do your own electronics projects. Another very popular hobby is cosplay, which is making costumes of characters from popular culture. If you go to a fabric store today and look at their pattern books, you'll definitely see lots of patterns catering to the costume crowd. And that's where the next generation of sewers is coming from. There's also been an explosion in the popularity of card games and board games. Check out Kickstarter to see all the new proposed games that are looking for funding. And when you've got a real physical game, you need to go find real physical people to play it with. What I see all these things coming together is that as so much of our life has become a virtual experience, we play our games virtually, do our work virtually, communicate with friends and family virtually, it's also important to remind ourselves to get out from behind the screen and go be creative, make something, get your hands dirty, and connect with other people in person. A live event like the City Steampunk Festival lets us all share together in this story that we're creating. And we get to tell our stories, show off what we've made, see what our friends have made, and then go away inspired to outdo them the next time. And sometimes you get to see a robot fight a kraken, and that's just cool. So why am I telling you all this? Well, there are multiple possible futures, and I considered multiple lessons. One possibility is that the lesson is that whatever you think the future is going to look like, you're probably wrong about something. I mean, you could be right. After all, Captain Kirk had his early model flip phone. But we still don't wear silver jumpsuits, and I still do not have my personal jetpack. But there was another future possibility where the lesson was that it isn't a choice between hands-on creativity and modern technology. You can have both. Mix it up. But in this timeline, I've decided the lesson is simply to go out and be creative. Go explore another world, another timeline, make the future that you want to see happen, and above all, do it with other people. Now, actually, I think I like one of the other lessons better. Excuse me, I'm going to go get in my time machine and go back and rewrite this entire speech. Thank you.